America Online was a big thing when I was 13 years old. In other words, from my generation, AIM, which stood for, you guessed it, AOL Instant Messenger. It was around 2002 or so, and I would have been freshly 13 and in 8th grade. I had many times gone into chat rooms by myself or with my friends to goof around. Unfortunately, unsolicited photos were a big thing then too. Usually you could at least stay clear of it by taking note of the chat rooms you entered though. I didn't have any photos of myself back then because you had to take a digital photo and upload it from your camera. Plus, I was 13 and quite self-conscious, which I'm sure anyone else can relate to. One day though, a guy popped up on my screen, wanting to chat. It went fine at first. I was extremely naive back then, and we quickly fell into a pattern of talking. This guy's name was Dave, and he lived in California. Of course, this escalated into him eventually telling me he loved me and all that sort of thing. Problem was, he was 19. I'm not proud of this exactly, but being 13, I sent some pictures of a random girl I found online and told him that was me. He instantly fell for me, telling me how age was just a number and how mature I was. At this point, he said he did not live in state, so there was never any chance of us meeting really. Eventually though, he told me he and his mom were moving to a city that was about an hour and a half away from me. He began to beg me to come see him, to go to a movie, to do anything with him. At this point, I broke the catfishing truth and told him those were not pictures of me, but of someone else entirely. He was furious, of course. He had been looking forward to a different type of child this whole time. A few days later, though, he forgave me, saying he still wanted to meet with me because he loved me. All the things you'd say to a young girl to get her to swoon. It's strange to think back and see how naive you were when you're a teenager. I told my best friend everything. I explained everything that happened and that I wanted her to go with me to meet him. There was a whole plan about him driving to see me and going to the movies to finally meet what I thought was the love of my life. I had been completely brainwashed into believing this was normal. I also didn't tell my mom, of course. Honestly, she didn't notice anything was wrong. She'd never been too involved, if you catch my drift. The day of, my friend and I were going to meet up with Dave. Her mom came and picked us up from school. Out of nowhere, she said something that made my stomach drop into nothingness. "Chrissy, you're not going to the movies. You're not going to meet that man. You're gonna get seriously hurt or kidnapped, and I can't allow you to go." I cried and cried because I honestly thought I could handle everything myself and be completely fine. She told me she was at least not going to tell my mom though. All I had to do was promise to never speak with Dave again and never plan to meet another stranger online. Dave actually ended up showing up and got quite angry that I wasn't there. He went on AIM, flying off the handle like I hadn't seen at that age. It really scared me. It scared me how suddenly he changed, and how close this man was to being near me. Dave never talked to me again after. I easily believe though I would have been kidnapped or worse that day if my best friend's mom hadn't stepped in. My mom would have been none the wiser. I was none the wiser already. But here I am today after having learned a dire lesson. Nobody is what they seem online. Make sure to keep your kids close. This happened about 10 years ago. I was in graduate school at the time, working on my master's degree for clinical social work. My practicum was at a confidential shelter, which housed women and children seeking shelter from domestic violence. Since I was only an intern, I worked quite a lot of late-night shifts. After closing up at the shelter, I started to head home. It was well after midnight, and because of this, the roads were all fairly empty. I lived in a smaller town at the time, so this was not entirely unusual. As I approached the stoplight though, I noticed a man stumbling a few yards away, walking towards the crosswalk. I suddenly got a very anxious and unsettling feeling. Immediately, I locked my car doors. Mind you, this was before I had a car with automatic door locks. I usually drove without ever locking my car doors, as I never felt unsafe while doing so. I felt better after having locked my doors this time though, and pulled up to the red light all alone. Staring ahead at the light, I noticed the man never crossed the street. I glanced to my right where I had seen him earlier, only to come face to face with his face pressed right up against my passenger side window. I screamed and honked my horn and told the man to go away. Instead, he continued standing there, staring through my window at me. Then he tried the handle of the door, without success. I continued screaming at him, honking my horn and waiting for the red light to change. The man straightened up weirdly, stepped away from the passenger side door, and quickly moved to my driver's side door, trying the handle once more. When that failed, he took a wide stance next to my car, as though he was about to lunge. He began to smack his hands against my window. At that moment, I thought to myself, screw this. I slammed the gas to run the red light. The man kind of stumbled back when I did this. I think I must have ran over his foot accidentally in my escape. When I arrived home, I woke up my husband to tell him, and he called the police. The police, of course, never found the man, as by the time they'd sent someone out, he was long gone. The police officer did commend me for running the red light though, as well as for potentially running over the man's foot. This story contains stalking, unwanted recording, and threats. Back when I was much smaller, I used to have a friend named Billy and his older brother Jack. There was a neighbor up above on a hill down the road from their house who was normally very reclusive. As a friend who just came over every other weekend, I wasn't really aware of his existence at first. One night I heard a creaking on their balcony outside while I was sleeping over in the living room. The living room had 3 large windows facing the balcony next to the street and the door to the left. I was having a bit of trouble sleeping since me and the friends had been staying up playing horror games. I peeked out the window for a moment, only to see a flash of light coming from the balcony. Understandably, I flipped the fuck out. The parents came running and sprinted out onto the balcony, where they caught a glimpse of a man sprinting away into the night. We stayed up the rest of the night eating snacks, kind of vibing together while all quite scared. The next weekend I was there, a man showed up at the door with a camera, recording us without us knowing for a few minutes. The father noticed and went out and started yelling at the man as he followed him up the road. The police were called as well. I'll admit, the father maybe hadn't handled this the best, but we were all pretty stressed out, and it was becoming quite a lot to deal with. The man was then identified as Daniel Vincent Kelly. The next weekend, we saw the man down in the far distance, in a large parking lot we could see nearby a lake. He was just riding his bike shirtless, in circles under a large spotlight, looking up at the house the entire time. We were understandably horrified. The man was very clearly mentally ill. He vanished from under the spotlight, and for the remainder of the night, we were holed up by the windows with weapons, just in case he tried to record us or break in. The next weekend, we were woken up in the middle of the night to a loud noise once more. We found his bike, sitting up against the edge of the house on the property. We all grabbed weapons and kept an eye out that night. We contacted the authorities again. It was around this point the cops found Daniel Vincent Kelly and informed us of a YouTube channel they discovered he had. This is the most chilling part to me by far, and the part that gives me extreme anxiety at night, almost every time I see a window. The most harrowing videos have long since been deleted due to legal troubles with being non-consensually filmed, but I did find a remaining video. He walks around and claims that a hole in their screen door, which I can verify never existed, had allowed their dog to escape and attack his dog. He claimed that within just a few minutes, my friend's mother replaced the screen on the door and was covering the incident up. This was all obviously false. The deleted videos, though, make me sick to think about. There were at least 30 videos of him secretly recording us, some from long before my first encounter with him. One, I remember even, was vividly in broad daylight, but I'd never seen him. He was just laying down behind a hill, holding his phone up just over it, recording us, calling me and my friend disgusting piglets as we played together on the porch. At least 10 of his videos featured me, but almost all of them featured my friend. Some of them even had him uttering threats to kill us, which was terrifying. Sadly, I wasn't allowed over the following weeks, and I don't know how the incident really ended. I do know I never saw Kelly again. I don't know if he got arrested or simply moved away. I wouldn't exactly like to search through his now inactive channel to find out though. Hi, this happened only a few hours ago, so I'm shaken, but it's too early in the morning to phone and wake up friends. I needed to just share this and get this out. Brief setting and context. I'm a woman in my 30s, caring for my elderly parents. This means staying in a downstairs room in my childhood home for the moment. The window faces the main street, which is an average residential street in a fairly quiet area. The bed also faces that window. I often leave this particular window open at night since I need it to be cool to sleep. I haven't really worried about it, since there's a cabinet with an aquarium in front of that window area. It didn't block the view since it was see-through. I could also reach to open and close it fairly easily. It would make it difficult for someone to climb inside though. My dog Sable also always sleeps in the room with me. While she's usually sweet-natured and a medium-sized dog who doesn't really look threatening, she's a fantastic guard dog in that she's always alert to any and all noises and will stand her ground and bark and growl if she senses a threat. After tonight, I won't be able to leave that window open again. It started maybe 3:30 or 4 a.m. sometime. I was still awake. Since I'm caring for my parents, I often have disrupted sleep patterns, and I'm awake at odd hours of the night. I was just reading a book when I heard Sable growl low and deep. She jumped off the bed and began to pace around, looking up at the window. Then she jumped up at the cabinet right by it. I called out just in case someone was actually there. "Hey, we're calling the police. This dog does bite." I went to look out the curtains to the side. I didn't see anything though. I pulled them shut once more and made sure they were completely closed, tucking them down as well so any wind wouldn't be able to move them. I wasn't really alarmed yet though. It's a fairly quiet residential street, true, but there are some foxes around me sometimes here, and occasionally someone will pass by or the neighbor's gate next door will make a squeaking sound or something. Usually though, she wouldn't react the way she did this time. She'd usually growl but stay on the bed. Her reaction was much stronger than normal. I thought that even if someone was scoping out the open window to potentially burgle, they'd seen now the room was occupied by an awake person and a dog. Surely they'd go find an easier target. I was wrong though. It was a good half hour or more later, after I'd relaxed a bit and thought I might doze off soon, when she began to growl once more, this time much more serious. I listened again, thinking it must be some foxes or something. Then though, I heard what sounded like deep, horror movie type breathing noises. The kind of heavy breathing sounds someone might make down the phone when stalking someone in a film. I sat up and looked at the window, and my heart stopped. The curtain had been pulled back and lifted at the bottom. Someone was peeking under it, and I could still hear the heavy breathing. I shouted once again and moved from the bed to the side of the window. I could just barely see past the curtain. I saw the figure of a man moving away from the window to the right, towards the front door and exit of the front garden. It was too dark to make out many features, just the dark male figure. Shaking, I immediately thought that since I knew he'd moved away and wasn't at or under the window, I reached over and pulled it shut. I grabbed my phone and called emergency services. One thing that really creeps me out in hindsight is that it would have taken a few seconds for me to move from the bed to the side of the window. That was after I'd shouted, and he knew he'd been seen as well. Still though, he stayed there, knowing I'd already seen him, until I moved the curtain and could see out the window fully. Only then did he move away. It was like he was purposely trying to frighten me. While on the phone with police, I went around the ground floor of the house turning all the lights on, making sure the rest of the house was still secure. It was, thankfully. Very careful to lock doors and other windows at night. Everything looked undisturbed. 2 patrol officers came shortly before 5 a.m. and took a report. They suggested asking the neighbors if they had camera footage and to let them know of a potential prowler in the area tomorrow. They went to drive around the area and search. Since the dark meant I'd only seen the shape of a person with no real description, I doubt they can do much though. I couldn't even be 100% certain it was a man. The breathing and the figure made me instantly think of a man though. The outline of his head was also smooth, so he was either bald or wearing some sort of skin-tight cap. I'm very shaken, angry, and violated. I really wish we have a camera system now. I'll be looking into that for sure. I never thought anything like this would happen. I don't have any enemies, no bad exes, no one I know harboring any grudges. Since I'm caring for my folks full-time now, I barely even get the chance to socialize. My elderly and disabled parents surely don't have any enemies either. I also don't consider myself very attractive, so not a likely target for a Peeping Tom either. If it wasn't for the fact that my dog alerted me to something both times, I'd have wondered whether I was half asleep or dreamed it all, that I'd imagined it. I have to think it was someone who was looking to burgle a house or something. But why did they hang around for so long then? Maybe someone on drugs or having a mental health episode? Maybe someone who just wanted to scare me. But why? And who? They know where we live for sure. I'm wondering if they're going to come back. New fears keep on popping into my mind. There's a passage around the side of the house to go from the front to the back garden, with only a small side gate. It's not designed to keep others out. It would be very easy for someone to access and then hide against the back of the house, completely hidden from view this time. They were bold enough to stick around even knowing I knew they were there. Perhaps they were hoping I'd just forget and fall asleep or something. I don't know, but it's pretty scary. This is maybe not as scary as some others you've heard, but this experience has been ingrained in my mind. I was about 5 or 6 years old. I went to my local kindergarten, and I was as carefree as a child can be. The greatest of my worries was my mom forgetting to pick me up from school. She never did though. Every day we walked from school to home and vice versa, since it was a good walking distance. We lived in a compound that was kind of secluded and mostly inhabited by old people or boarding students who went to university nearby. This morning started out like any other. My mom picked me up and we were walking along the small path in our compound, along with 4 other people. 3 high schoolers, 2 of which were walking together, and a female college student. She was holding a handkerchief over her head because of the heat. The sun was high up and glaring. It was the middle of the day. You wouldn't expect anything to happen, but surely enough it did. We were quite far back from this group when I turned around and saw a man had suddenly joined us. He was clearly not from here. He had a bright neon green bag in front of him, which was slightly opened, one of his hands tucked inside. His clothes were kind of dusty, but the most eerie thing was how deeply he was glaring at us. It was just the 5 of us walking in this quiet area. My little self didn't really think much of it until my mom firmly squeezed my hand and started to walk much faster. At first, I was very confused. I knew the only thing that could trigger this was danger behind us. It must have come from the form of that stranger who was now following us closely behind. I tried to look back discreetly. The man was now glaring hatefully at all of us, getting closer and closer. I looked at my mom to ask what was going on, but her low, worried murmurs didn't really translate well for me. My ears did pick up on the word knife though. That's when I felt my stomach drop. As a child, you only ever watch scary situations happening on TV, never really thinking you'd be in any real danger, but now I was. My stupid little legs weren't going fast enough. Factor in my mom's older age. She was around 50 at the time, compared to our other companions, and we were clearly the easiest target. We were also at the back too. Luckily, our house was still nearby. I couldn't resist looking back. The man was getting closer and closer, shortening the distance between us. I remember thinking about how I wanted to scream for help, desperately looking around at all these houses that were empty. My mom's firm grip kept me going. At least we lived here too. I never really knew if the others were aware of this man as well. One of the high schoolers walked quickly to a house over nearby the basketball court and further down the path. The pair veered off into a different trail that led to the main highway. This meant it was just us and the female college student left behind. At this point, the man was walking very fast, catching up bit by bit. Our apartment was only a few steps away. My mom and I began to sprint toward it, up the stairs and into the comfort of our own home. Right as we reached the door, the man gave us one last glare. He looked like he wanted to stop for a moment, but instead kept on walking. My heart was pounding against my chest. My mom left me to lock the door while she stared out the window. She kept on repeating, "He has a knife. I saw it. He's holding a knife." I ran towards the window and caught a glimpse of that college girl, still clutching that handkerchief over her head. She was now looking behind her in fear and alarm as the man started to follow her quite quickly, his bright bag in front of him, now wide open, his hands still inside. He was getting closer and closer. I couldn't watch anymore after. I don't know what happened, only my mom's recollection of the events. She had noticed the man suddenly coming up behind us. Her suspicions were raised when he hadn't tried to walk past us like the others, but instead maintained a close distance between us. Then she saw the knife hidden away in his bag. He gripped it as he stared at all of us. I really hope the girl is okay and that the man didn't do anything. It's been years now, and I don't really know where to start to find out. I don't really know if I'd like to as well. Sometimes I wonder what that girl must have been feeling.